the 18th century saw the British as absolute masters of the country. Never before in history had a trading company come to control an empire. The new conquerors, having amassed vast fortunes through corruption and coercion, lived a life of ease and extravagance. The necessity of a newspaper to expose administrative avarice was thought of by many, but it was James Augustus Hickey who started his Bengal Gazette from Calcutta on the 29th of January 1780. Hinting at corruption in high places, Hickey fired his salvos at the Governor-General, Warren Hastings, and the Chief Justice, Sir Elijah Impey. Impey sentenced him to long periods of imprisonment for libel. His press confiscated, the paper ceased publication. Within a decade of Hickey's pioneering venture, several newspapers made their appearance. The possible growth of national consciousness among Indians haunted the government. This led Lord Wellesley to impose the notorious press regulations. Raja Ram Mohan Roy, who started a Bengali weekly, Sambad Kamudi, opposed the press regulations. James Silk Buckingham was another whose paper, the Calcutta Journal, dared to expose the maladministration of the company, for which he was expelled from India. During Lord William Bentinck's period, a number of vernacular newspapers were started by enterprising Parsis. One of them, the Rast Goftar, was edited by Dadabhai Nauroji. The Great Uprising of 1857 brought out the worst form of racialism in the Anglo-Indian press. It carried exaggerated and fanciful accounts of Indian brutality and cried for reprisals. When the Crown took over the company on the 1st of November 1858, several Anglo-Indian papers were founded. These papers mostly served the Crown and the British business interests. Significantly, Kipling worked for the Civil and Military Gazette, and Winston Churchill wrote for the Pioneer. In 1868, Sisir Kumar Ghosh started the Amrit Bazar Patrika, a Bengali weekly, to use his words, to rouse the people from their slumber. The Patrika's fearless exposures often led to head-on collisions with the government.
The Lieutenant Governor, Sir Ashley Eden, he was very angry with the Patrika. So he thought that he would speak to my father and make such arrangement that editorials could not be sent to the press straight away. They should first be shown to the Lieutenant Governor and then printed. My father went to Belvedere, where the Lieutenant Governor stayed, and he argued and argued. My father also argued against it. But finally, Lieutenant Governor said that, Shishir Babu, you are insulting me. I shall teach you a lesson. I shall send you out of Calcutta, bag and baggage, in 6 months' time. Because my father had said, does not your honor want that there should be a single honest newspaper in India? This went home. And the Lieutenant Governor went to Lord Lytton, then Viceroy, and brought out this, the Vernacular Press Act.
Several vernacular papers closed down. Amrit Bazar Patrika switched overnight to English to circumvent the act. During this period, Sardar Dayal Singh Majithia launched the Tribune from Lahore. The Hindu appeared from Madras. Its first editor, G. Subramanya Iyer, was to emerge as a great journalist.
The role he played in politics could best be understood when it is known that it was he who moved the first resolution of the Indian National Congress at its very first session in Bombay in 1885. And from that time onwards, the editors of the Hindu have been in some way or the other concerned very closely with the experiences of the national movement. Magnitude of that task could be understood by the fact that they had to confront not only the establishment of the day, but also the Anglo-Indian press, which was propped up by the British rulers to support them.
Despite all these odds, national newspapers began to appear in most parts of the country. When, in response to Alan Octavian Hume's call, the Indian National Congress was formed on the 28th of December 1885, it heralded a renaissance in which the press fully participated. Tilak was the first to realize the power of the press. He used his papers, the Kesari and Maratha, to attack government's apathy and exploitation. In 1897, he was sentenced to 18 months rigorous imprisonment, the first conviction of a political journalist. The massive political agitation that followed the Bengal partition in 1905 was supported by the entire national press. Surendranath Banerjee and Aurobindo Ghosh kept the agitation alive in the columns of Bengali and Bande Mataram. Amrit Bazar Patrika indignantly remarked, "Lord Curzon has thrown 60 millions of Bengalis into a paroxysm of grief. He has 72,000 British soldiers to help him." Lala Lajpat Rai, whose political career started with his militant weekly, the Punjabi, was arrested on a trumped-up charge and deported to Mandalay. The ferocity of what Gokhale called the sedition hunt reached its peak when Lord Minto clamped the Newspaper Act on the 8th of June 1908. Innumerable newspapers throughout the country ceased publication. Subramania Bharati, the Tamil poet-journalist, crossed over to Pondicherry to escape arrest. Tilak was deported to Mandalay to serve a 6-year sentence. Meanwhile, the Anglo-Indian press flourished. In Bombay, the Times of India moved into an impressive building. Dubbed the Old Woman of Boribandar by Benjamin Guy Horniman, it was to face competition from a newcomer, the Bombay Chronicle. Established in 1913 by Firoz Shah Mehta, with Horniman as its editor, the Chronicle sent shivers down many a bureaucratic spine. Annie Besant, through her papers, The Commonweal and New India, waged a battle for Home Rule. "We claim liberty, not favor," she wrote. On the 16th of June 1917, she was interned to nationwide protest. The editor of the Comrade, Maulana Muhammad Ali, and Abul Kalam Azad of Al-Hilal were also interned without trial. The Rowlatt Act of 1919 added insult to injury. Peaceful protests met with brutal repression. British troops roamed the streets to humiliate, to terrorize. On the 13th of April 1919, in Amritsar, was committed a massacre most foul. In connivance with the Anglo-Indian press, the government's attempts to suppress the news of the Jallianwala Bagh tragedy were foiled by the Bombay Chronicle, which published a detailed report. For this, Horniman was deported to England and censorship clamped on the paper. To mark its protest, the editorial column of the Chronicle was left blank. Severe penalties awaited many others. Kalinath Rai, the editor of the Tribune was sentenced to 2 years rigorous imprisonment.
Kalinath Rai, who served a very long period as editor of the paper, suffered a great deal during his tenure. The paper was closed down during the independence movement for a period. Kalinath Rai was sentenced to imprisonment and a fine. During the martial law days, he even had to crawl as a punishment. Punishment did not deter him from doing his duty. In fact, Kalinath Rai became a byword in courage and determination.
Gandhi, who came into journalism with Young India and Navjivan, said, Plassey laid the foundation of the British Empire. Amritsar has shaken it. The non-cooperation movement he launched in 1921 convulsed the country. The Secretary of State, Edwin Montagu, advised Indians not to challenge the most determined people in the world. Birkenhead boasted of Britain's hard fibre. Gandhi took up the challenge in an editorial in Young India. No empire intoxicated with the red wine of power and plunder of weaker races has lived long. For his seditious writings, Gandhi was sentenced to 6 years imprisonment. The non-cooperation movement also influenced the pattern of the press. Several newspapers representing various views, the Liberal, the Swaraj Party and the Congress, were launched in different parts of the country. The vernacular press in particular was making its mark. In 1924 appeared the Hindustan Times, the capital's first national daily, with K.M. Panikkar as its editor. National newspapers unanimously condemned the all-British Simon Commission, mobilizing public opinion for its boycott. Simon, go back, protested tens of thousands regardless of arrest, lathi charge and firing. Jawaharlal Nehru and Gobind Vallabh Pant received baton blows during these demonstrations. Lala Lajpat Rai's death was hastened by this assault. When Gandhi started on his unparalleled Dandi March on the 12th of March 1930 to break the Salt Law, the government's reaction was fierce and punitive, particularly towards the press. 67 newspapers ceased publication and 55 presses were closed. Several editors were arrested. Cyclo-styled underground newspapers made their appearance. Following the Gandhi-Irwin Pact, the Indian Press Ordinance was withdrawn on the 6th of March 1931. It proved short-lived. While Gandhi was away in London to attend the Round Table Conference, Irwin's successor, Willingdon, followed a policy of repression. Gandhi was arrested on return and the press gagged once again. One of the worst hit was the Free Press Journal and its editor S. Sadanand.
In 1930, he started the Free Press Journal, which became a sensation. It was a revolutionary paper, first of its kind in India. Big, bold headlines, 48-point black, very brash headlines sometimes. But from the very start, he began to fall foul of the British government. First, he had to pay a fine of 6,000 rupees or 3 months imprisonment. Later on, he was called upon to pay a security deposit of 6,000 rupees. And then this became a regular pattern. 6,000, 10,000, another 10,000, then 20,000. In all, about 70,000 rupees were paid by him as security deposit. When the Congress government came to power in India, he was asked by the then Chief Minister, Mr. B.G. Kher, whether he would like to get the security deposit back. He was too proud to ask for it.
Jawaharlal Nehru's involvement with journalism began with the National Herald, which represented left-of-centre Congress views.
About the same time, we find the emergence of what can really be called a left press. There was the Congress Socialist Party's paper called Congress Socialist, Independent India started by M.N. Roy, then the communists who are still an illegal party, they had the National Front. The two-way communication in these papers. On one side, naturally, these papers focused more and more news about the peasantry, the working class, the radical student movement. On the other hand, they carried the message of independence to all these segments of society.
The menacing shadow of fascism was lengthening across Europe. Hitler's armies marched into Prague, then Poland. Not long after, the Battle of Britain. Simultaneously, Lord Linlithgow, the Viceroy, took India to war by proclamation without consulting Indian national leaders. Censorship of the press was tightened under the Defence of India rules. Gandhi's call on the 8th of August 1942 to the nation to either free India or die in the attempt brought cruel and atrocious reprisals. The government suppressed 96 newspapers and journals and imposed heavy penalties on many more. But the press could not be kept down for long. It highlighted the tragedy of the Bengal famine, in which more than 3 million died. The Royal Indian Navy mutiny, which hastened the departure of the British from India, was flashed by the Free Press Journal and Blitz and some others. The 40s was a period of great upheaval and turmoil. Dawn, the official mouthpiece of the Muslim League, called for the partition of the country. The two-nation theory resulted in the worst ever communal riots in the country. The national press, calling for communal harmony, vigorously opposed the division of the country.
Bombay Chronicle was staunchly against partition. Not once but several times Mr. Brailby wrote very strong editorials against it himself. Mr. Brailby went to a meeting at which there was some discussion over these communal matters. And the local Muslim League toughs demanded that he should leave the hall and should not be present. But Mr. Brailby, once he had decided to speak, he was very firm on it. So he did speak, and against the communalists. And at the end of the meeting, there was one man who came from the back and stabbed him. But luckily for Mr. Brailby, he was always wearing a very loose sherwani. So this dagger hit the sherwani and slit it into two parts. And other people came and saved him.
Out of the blood and tears of millions, a new nation was born.
Long years ago, we made a tryst with destiny, and now the time comes when we shall redeem our pledge, not wholly or in full measure, but very substantially.
In this long and arduous journey, the Indian press has played a proud and dignified role, shirking no responsibility, fearing no master, sparing no sacrifice. Many outstanding men have filled its ranks. Their pen was mightier than any sword.